A new report from the FDIC says America's four biggest banks have a total of $205 billion in unrealized losses, in other words, hidden losses. The worst was at Bank of America, which the FDIC pegs at a $100 billion hidden hole in its books, while Wells and Morgan are both sporting $40 billion in losses, and Citibank is at $25. I've talked about these in previous videos, but banks have an outrageous legal privilege where they can choose to value their assets not at what they're worth, but at an imaginary price called held to maturity that dreams up what the price might be worth someday in the future. This is akin to losing money at the casino and telling your wife it's all there because you'll make it back next time. I imagine it might actually come as a surprise to many Americans that potentially hundreds of banks are insolvent, but for imaginary prices on their assets. But of course, regulators work for the banks, so banks get to pretend. Unless, that is, depositors get so nervous that they withdraw, which would force the banks to actually sell the imaginary assets at real-world prices. In case you were curious why Yellen, Biden, and Powell move heaven and earth to gaslight Americans into thinking banks are safe. This is exactly what took Silicon Valley Bank down in March, sparking the current bank crisis. In Silicon Valley's case, they started losing depositors because tech was hit, which meant they had to sell some of their imaginary bonds to cover the withdrawals. When they announced a $1.8 billion loss on those sales, depositors panicked and pulled, ultimately, a staggering 81% of deposits in just 2 days. This meant the bank had to sell substantially all of its imaginary assets, revealing their insolvency. In other words, the bank was insolvent long before the bank run. They were just allowed to hide it. By the way, that bank run was orders of magnitude faster than any modern bank run, which is why the Fed is exploring ways to lock depositors in, so you would have to go down with your failing bank. Mentioned that in a recent video. It's also why Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell are as nervous as cats in a room full of rocking chairs, desperately chanting that banks are 100% rock solid, good as gold, when in fact just four of them just admitted sitting on $205 billion of hidden losses. As for the other 4,000 banks in America, we can only imagine what losses lurk hidden in their books. A March paper from Stanford and Columbia did imagine, estimating close to $2 trillion in unrealized losses in American banks, which incidentally would eat up, according to that same paper, roughly 91% of banks' capital buffer, suggesting the entire U.S. banking system is within 1% or 2% of insolvency. And that was March. A lot has happened between then and now. So what's next? Banks only show their books every quarter, and even then regulators let them hide, fudge, and manipulate. Anything to convince Americans they're sound, even if they are not. So expect quarterly flashes of chaos to drip out one by one, while panicked regulators keep up the rock-solid, good-as-gold talk until, inevitably, they flip to the age-old, nobody could have seen it coming. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.